I think it's pretty clear that there's many critics of the BBC, and let's be honest, predominantly on the right, who are gloating about these developments. Gloating about the fact the BBC has had to come out and apologise, and gloating about the fact that the BBC is being hammered at the moment. I am not joining that bandwagon, and I'll get into that in a minute, but I will say this. Trump's very obnoxious press secretary, Karoline Leavitt, said the BBC is 100% fake news. 100% fake news is her words, and that British viewers should watch GB News instead. I think the BBC should sue her for defamation, and it can come from the Director General or something like that. Of course, he's resigned, but someone at a senior level. How dare Karoline Leavitt tell British viewers what they should and shouldn't watch? This is just typical of MAGA arrogance, and it's why I loathe the Trump administration and everyone that allows himself to be sycophants for it. I mean, how arrogant that she thinks she has a right to tell British viewers what they should and shouldn't watch. Of course she's going to defend her boss, you would expect that. But actually telling people they should watch GB News instead? Imagine if Keir Starmer or any British leader came out and said to Americans, you should watch CNN, not Fox, or something equivalent. The arrogance is just infuriating. So the latest development is the BBC has apologised, but they have refused to pay compensation, and I'm pleased that they haven't. I don't see why the hell they should. Let's be very clear, the BBC didn't actually say anything inaccurately. What they did is they edited Trump's speech, which, was bad journalism. They should not have done that. One reason I think they shouldn't have done it, apart from the fact that it's misleading, is that it allows Trump to play the victim. And he isn't. He's a criminal. He's a demagogue, and I just find it particularly perverse that people are gloating about the fact that BBC's being hammered and treating Donald Trump like he's an innocent victim. Let's be very clear about certain things. I'm going to get into the report specifically about the apology in a minute, but I want to be very clear about certain points because there's a lot being distorted right now. None of this vindicates Trump in any way, shape or form. And I'm reading now from the Tennessee Lookout. This is from December 2022. US House January 6th panel report finds Trump incited insurrection, demands accountability. Washington. The US House January 6th committee last Thursday published its findings in a nearly 850-page report that accused former President Donald Trump, this was published in 2022, of inciting an insurrection and recommended Congress consider how to determine whether those found to be insurrectionists should be barred from holding office ever again. That's not the BBC. That's the US House of Representatives found Trump was responsible for insurrection. That's the first point to consider. Secondly, Donald Trump is a convicted felon. That's just a fact. It's not an opinion, it's a fact. Thirdly, Donald Trump pardoned the violent insurrectionists, every last one of them. I remember there was an older woman who she was one of the few that actually showed remorse, and she said she didn't feel she should have been pardoned. She felt like she had been hoodwinked into the thing, and she felt guilty for what she'd done. I give her credit. She was one of the very few that showed some integrity and took responsibility for her actions. Many others didn't. Donald Trump called them great patriots. He pardoned every last one of them for the sole reason that they were his supporters. Imagine if Biden or Obama had, say, violent BLM activists or violent Antifa activists, and they attacked the US Capitol on the day that Trump was inaugurated, and Biden or Obama then got re-elected and they pardoned them. Just the outcry would be unbelievable. Donald Trump pardoned the violent insurrectionists. Let's not forget, in the 2020 election, Donald Trump actually tried to interfere with the Georgia results. He tried to, put pressure on Georgia officials to change the results. Absolute corruption. So those are facts. And the BBC edit doesn't change any of that. Donald Trump incited the violence. Donald Trump refused to concede defeat. Donald Trump pardoned violent insurrectionists. Donald Trump's a convicted felon. Not a violent convicted felon, but he he incited violence. And I'm sick and tired of Trump cheerleaders trying to distort this. And, they're jumping on this because they don't like the BBC. Well, if you don't like the BBC, my response is, look, there's things I don't like about the BBC. I know there's people been commenting on my video explaining why they don't like the BBC. One of my subscribers that I respect, I want to emphasise this, he said that it always sounds like a woke lecture, and I can understand that. But I still maintain that there's more straight news reporting in the BBC than pure punditry. I mean, how often do you see BBC people gathering around and just getting into punditry? It happens occasionally, but I would argue far less than other networks. And the fact that Karoline Leavitt pitched for people to watch GB News is telling. Is GB News going to sort of push back and say, with respect, of course they're going to lap it up. Because they're a mouthpiece for Donald Trump and the Reform Party, as far as I'm concerned. It's one of my biggest issues with GB News. People say, oh, but Nathan, the right wing, and they're upfront about it. It isn't just about a right wing bias. I would argue there's actually serious conflicts of interest there. The fact that they have had Conservative and Reform Party politicians appear so regularly, that's more than just bias. It's suggesting a conflict of interest. So I'm going to read out a little bit about the latest development. I know Sir Ed Davey has been very vocal in defending the BBC and pointing out that, I'm going to read out this report, but I have to say I agree with him, because I think it's very clear that this is coordinated political attacks. And what I find pretty ironic is a lot of those attacking the BBC, they absolutely won't acknowledge or consider that the right-wing tabloid editors that are attacking it, they will cherry-pick what they report. Do people seriously think that right-wing newspaper editors don't edit their own content? I mean, it's in the title, editor. They edit content all the time to suit their agenda. And an example I would give recently, the Daily Telegraph, when there was a flare-up in the Middle East, they report 2 Israeli soldiers killed, then in tiny little writing at the bottom, 50 more Palestinians, or whatever the figure was, in tiny little writing. So every outlet distorts on some level, yet people just home in on the BBC. So I have a problem with that hypocrisy. This is a report from the BBC, and that in itself is significant, because there's not many other networks that would be this upfront about their own failings. That's not to say that the BBC doesn't have a lot of grounds for improving, but they take the bull by the horns. They say, yes, this is our scandal and we're talking about it. Other networks would want to just sweep the issue under the carpet. This report's by Noor Nanji. The BBC has apologised to US President Donald Trump for a Panorama episode that spliced parts of his January the 6th, 2021 speech together, but rejected his demands for compensation. The corporation said the edit had given the mistaken impression that President Trump had made a direct call for violent action, and said it would not show the 2024 programme again. Lawyers for Trump have threatened to sue the BBC for $1 billion in damages unless the corporation issues a retraction, apologises and compensates him. I'd initially thought it was either compensate or apologise. I didn't realise Trump had demanded both, like he needs more money. Like a billionaire president needs more money. Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy told BBC Breakfast she was confident the corporation was gripping this with the seriousness it demands, adding her role was to ensure the highest standards are upheld. But she also told BBC Radio 4's Today programme that the BBC's editorial standards and guidelines were in some cases not robust enough and in other cases not consistently applied, adding that there would need to be people at a very senior level with a journalistic background. Political appointments to the corporation's board would be examined in the BBC's charter review, she said in response to a question asking if member Sir Robbie Gibb, a former political advisor to Theresa May, had overstepped his remit and weighed into politics. He's a controversial figure because he'd actually been on an advisory board to GB News. So much for left-wing bias at the BBC. This proves there's right-wing figures in the BBC. While this was a matter for the board and its chairman, she said, those appointments damage confidence and trust in the BBC's impartiality. Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davey had urged the Prime Minister on Thursday to get on the phone to Trump to put a stop to his lawsuit threatened to defend the impartiality and the independence of the BBC. The fallout from the scandal led to the resignations of BBC Director General Tim Davie and Head of News Deborah Turnus on Sunday. BBC News has approached the White House for comment. That would be a comment in response to their own situation. The apology comes hours after a second similarly edited clip broadcast on Newsnight in 2022 was revealed by the Daily Telegraph. The Daily Telegraph, which of course is extremely neutral in its coverage of everything, not. In its corrections and clarifications section published on Thursday evening, the BBC said the Panorama programme had been reviewed after criticism of how Trump's speech has been edited. The BBC had been given a deadline of 10 o'clock GMT on Friday to respond. That's tonight. We accept that our edit unintentionally created the impression that we were showing a single continuous segment of the speech rather than experts from different points in the speech, and that this gave the mistaken impression that President Trump had made a direct call for violent action, the statement said. Lawyers for the BBC have written to President Trump's legal team in response to a letter received on Sunday, a BBC spokesperson said. BBC Chair Samir Shah has separately sent a personal letter to the White House making clear to President Trump that he and the corporation are sorry for the edit of the President's speech on the 6th of January 2021, which featured in the programme, they said. I'm going to quote a piece from the activist. He was founder of the Reform Watch group. This is Jack Dart, and I think this really is a very important point. The BBC has its flaws and moments of failure, but it remains one of the few institutions still capable of speaking truth to power. In an age when billionaires, demagogues and propagandists are working to bend every platform to their will, defending the BBC is an act of democratic self-preservation. It belongs to the public, not to those who would see it broken for daring to hold them to account. I have to say I absolutely agree. You know, people say the BBC is extremely biased to the left. I would say if there is a bias, it is to the left. But the irony about all of this is Tim Davie is actually one of the more conservative Director Generals of recent years. In fact, he stood as a Conservative Party candidate, council candidate in London. So this idea that the BBC is just awash with sort of metropolitan liberal leftists, I don't think is quite accurate. I can see where that perception comes from, but I don't think it is entirely accurate. Now, I'm not going to go into all the reasons I've had issue with the BBC. I've already done that. I've already covered that in another video. I think there is times it comes across as establishment, arrogance and so on. But I think that we need to be very careful and look at what's happening here. You have an arrogant, bullying American president who is just obsessed with litigious pressurizing. And I think it would be an absolute disgrace if the BBC pandered to his demands for compensation, because the BBC didn't actually lie about anything he said. What they done is they edited part of the speech. That's not the same as lying about the speech. And remember, the US House of Representatives did find Trump guilty of inciting violence. And I'm willing to bet that a lot of the right-wing outlets are now attacking the BBC. They also covered the riots in January 2021 negatively, because it was so awful that very few people could defend that, except Trump's biggest sycophants. But, 4 years on, we're seeing a distortion. And what I find sick is this idea that Trump's being portrayed as the victim here. This guy is a criminal who pardoned other criminals. I think the whole thing is grotesque. Donald Trump, in my view, is the worst president in American history. He is the only president to have incited a mob against the US Capitol because he was a sore loser, because he couldn't accept the results of a democratic election that he lost. I just think it's so perverse that he's being framed to be the victim. And I've seen it. I've seen all these comments coming out with the gloating about the fact that BBC's had to apologise and the fact that both left and right are attacking it right now. Jack Dart says, the BBC takes a beating from the left and the right, which tells you it still must be doing something right. It stands almost alone in challenging power wherever it lies, and that's precisely why it needs defending. I wouldn't entirely agree with that. I think there are other sources that question power. As much as I dislike it, I would say the Daily Mail does challenge left and right, although it's definitely biased to the right. But it is true, our newspapers are often owned by tycoons and billionaires. The BBC isn't. And I think people just need to be very aware of what's going on here. We have an American demagogue who, in my opinion, if reform gets into power, they will sell this country to Trump. They will just pander to him to the point of absurdity. You know, they want to break up the BBC. I notice Kimmy Badenoch's been a bit more careful. She says she wants to preserve the BBC, but she wants to protect them from themselves. So she's been careful to, not jump on the bandwagon too much. But apparently Farage and his party have pulled out of a BBC documentary they were going to take part in because of this Trump thing. It just shows how sycophantic they are to Donald Trump. I think it's unforgivable that Nigel Farage went to Washington, the capital of another country, to basically run down this country, say Britain's broken. That is extremely unpatriotic. Imagine if Starmer, when he was leader of the opposition, went to another country and said Britain's broken. It wouldn't stand. I do think there is something in what we're seeing right now. We keep hearing Starmer's the most unpopular Prime Minister since records began and all this sort of thing. I've no doubt he's unpopular, and I'm not a big fan of Starmer. I think he's weak in areas where he should be strong, particularly China. But I do have a theory that when there is a Labour government in power, some of the criticism on issues like immigration and crime escalate disproportionately. The actual net immigration is not as radically increased as people think. In fact, if anything, it has decreased. So why is there such a pile-on to Starmer's government? I think that there is a very, very coordinated right-wing campaign out there to bring down the government because it's the Labour Party, and to bring down the BBC. And that to me is extremely dangerous, because I'm not talking so much about the government, but the BBC. Imagine this country without the BBC. Sky News is all right. Channel 4 is definitely to the left. GBeam News is a mouthpiece of the Reform Party as far as I'm concerned. I just think that for all its faults, the BBC at its best could still offer something of great value. I think at its best it is still the best. I genuinely believe that. And I'm not saying this as a BBC sycophant. I have my own contentions with the BBC, I really do. I mean, the Hugh Edwards scandal was an utter disgrace. I think he should be in jail, but that was up to a judge, it wasn't up to his colleagues. And he shouldn't have got a single penny after he was found guilty. Then you get numerous scandals over the years. Like I say, an organisation that's over 100 years old, of course there's going to be scandals. Of course an organisation the size of the BBC isn't going to be squeaky clean. How can it be? But I'm just very wary of those who are jumping on the bandwagon right now. As for Donald Trump and Karoline Leavitt, to hell with them. Trump is rotten as hell. He's a demagogue. Karoline Leavitt, the arrogance of her to tell British viewers what they should and shouldn't watch. And this isn't directly connected to this story, but that couple that was accused of the racist attack in London, we should be demanding their extradition if they're back in the United States. I am sick and tired of hearing MAGA arrogance. I'm sick and tired of MAGA bullying. And Trump was whining about this is supposedly an allied country. Well, he's putting tariffs on this allied country. Less than other countries, but still, tariffs. I think if other Western countries stood up to Trump, he would back down. But, morphing him into the victim, Donald Trump is a billionaire president who has had some very, very powerful backers. I mean, Elon Musk, for example, maybe not now, but that industrial scale disinformation is... What I find so sickening is people look to Donald Trump as some sort of messenger of truth. The man has lied and lied and lied and lied. For years, he smeared Barack Obama as not being a real American. The whole birtherism thing. Never, ever has he apologized for that. Trump has never apologized for anything he's done. The one time I can remember making a half apology was that crude video of him talking about sexually assaulting women. He kind of made a half apology on that occasion, but pretty much nothing else. Because he is a narcissist. He's, that's plain to see. So, a lot of people right now are gloating. Oh, the BBC's been brought to its knees. They've had to apologise. But don't be under any delusion. This does not vindicate Donald Trump. And I think if Trump doesn't accept this, If he keeps pushing for this compensation thing, Keir Starmer needs to get a backbone and stand up for a British institution. Tell Trump to back off. My concern about Starmer is he's just too hesitant to say no. He needs to stand up for a British institution. As flawed as that institution may be. Because what we're getting here is a litigious foreign bully. That's really what this is. The BBC's apologised, that should be it. This claim for how does Donald Trump need $1 billion? He's already a billionaire. Does he need more money? And if he's going to argue that's going to go to... I mean, it's just absurd. I also don't think it would stand in the court of law, even in the United States. I would also once again quote that YouGov's study earlier this year found that the BBC was above any American network in terms of trust among American viewers. So go figure. I just feel that, a lot of people are harbouring their own dislike of the BBC and not considering what is going on here. Not considering that you have a foreign leader who is trying to destroy a British institution. I think Ed Davey is absolutely right to speak out on this. And I support him. It's not because I'm blind to the BBC's flaws. It's not because I'm uncritical of the BBC. But the idea of the American president playing a part in destroying it makes my stomach turn, to be quite honest. And Karoline Leavitt should mind her own damn business. It's not up to her to tell British viewers what network they should watch. And frankly, I think we need to speak out a bit more when it comes to things like that. I think Starmer should speak out in whatever nice political way he wants to do it, but he should speak out on things like that. I think from this administration there's just too much of a reluctance to offend Trump. It's just kind of fear of American power, but we have to stop acting like that. We have to stop allowing this MAGA administration to push us around. Anyway, that's the latest developments. I appreciate not everyone will agree with me. What I'm saying here, I'm not getting you to like the BBC. I'm not getting you to, I'm not trying to say the BBC doesn't have its faults. And clearly there does need to be significant reforms. But all I'm saying is look at what's happening here. I mean, is it really a coincidence a lot of people are jumping on the bandwagon because of one edit? I mean, right-wing tycoons do this all the time. I was going to say editors, that's actually in the title, editors. But I agree with Jack Dart, I agree with Sir Ed Davey. I think that this is definitely an orchestrated campaign to bring down the BBC. I'm not jumping on that bandwagon. For all its faults, I still support the BBC. When it comes to Trump versus the BBC, Truth Social equals Lies Central. Trump is a liar. And so is a lot of those in his administration. It's built on lies. Just lie and lie and lie and lie and lie. And nothing that has happened with that edit vindicates Donald Trump. The fact remains, and I'll close with this, he is a convicted felon who pardoned violent insurrectionists, who was found guilty by the US House of Representatives for inciting the violence. Trump is not vindicated.